In the first era of Shar's Grymforge, Selûv-Yarli's name echoed throughout the Underdark, but now he was gone, and the Grymforge's second era begins. Selûv-Yarli's life passed into legend. The Grymforge he built turned into stories that would be spread from mouth to mouth almost 1,000 years later. These fables reached throughout Faerûn's surface and down into the depths below. In the Underdark, Dawn, Zargrim and Filro heard of Selûv's forge and sought it out. They were unsuccessful. Mind you, if you watched the video on the first era of Shar's Grymforge, you know that Shar probably enjoyed seeing the 3 drow wizards petrify, perish and descend into madness in search of her temple. These stories eventually met the ears of Ketheric Thorm. He may have heard them as a child, bedtime stories told by candlelight, and not thought much of them at the time. It's difficult to discern legend from history over the passage of time. When Ketheric lost his wife and then, decades later, his daughter, he turned from Selûne to her dark sister, Shar. To try and outrun the grief closing in on his life, he served Shar with ferocity. And then, the legend of Selûv-Yarli's Grymforge returned to him. He began to investigate. Using his growing Sharan devotees, with him at the helm, of course, eventually he found the Grymforge and what remained of the winding underground corridors and dormitories that existed around it. One of his followers wrote in the aspirationally titled Grymforge A History that it had been 800 years since the Grymforge was abandoned. The history itself is so bare that the book's binding is thicker than the actual amount of pages between the covers though. Nevertheless, history didn't really matter to Ketheric. He sought to rebuild the underground city so he could start to amass a terrible army. In my video on the Grymforge's first era, I theorised that after Selûv's disappearance, his adamantine golem broke loose and rampaged through the stronghold. It was abandoned as a result. There is another possible explanation, however. Did Shar do what she has done many times before and command her Dark One to raze the fortress to the ground in order to start anew elsewhere, just like she did with Viconia and planned to do with Shadowheart? Shar really does just play with her followers like they're one big Jenga tower ready to fall. Ketheric, buoyed by his love for the Dark Lady, begun a series of expeditions. These expeditions excavated the rubble, cobwebs and dust that had occupied the Grymforge for centuries. How he knew of its location I do not know, but considering it's built fairly close to Wraithwyn in the Underdark, I reckon there might have been long whispered about rumours in Wraithwyn that something waited in the depths below. The corridors, classrooms, dormitories, kitchens, ritual rooms and the forge itself didn't have all of the statues that we see now in Tav's eyes. As a matter of fact, the Grymforge appears to have been fairly austere in design during Selûv's time. Ketheric decided it needed some extra panache to honour his goddess, and so he acted accordingly. All the statues of Shar, warriors, the gold in the stonework, the ornate metalwork existed at Ketheric's orders. He built these new decorations atop of the ruins of the old fortress. I know this because of a crucial exchange with stonemason Kith, the Duergar. When speaking to the Duergar stonemason, Tav looks upon a stone rendering of Shar and observes that the statue's meandering curves and golden edges stand out against the weathered masonry behind it. 2 styles, 2 eras. The statue was carved from newer stone and erected by latecomers to this ancient fortress. Thus, the second era of the Grymforge began, born anew in polished stone. During the first age of the stronghold, we have no indication what, if any, statues were erected to honour the Dark Lady. In the second era, Ketheric or his architects show a clear preference for one of Shar's avatars, the Dark Dancer. Avatars are an incarnation or embodiment of a deity in the planes of the Forgotten Realms. Gods rarely have physical bodies like creatures do. Instead, they're forces in the true sense of the word, more akin to wind or gravity or light than anything of flesh and blood. It's, however, quite difficult to build an emotional connection with a god if you don't have a face to look upon and channel your worship into, and so gods manifest themselves in various forms known as avatars. Gods often have multiple but may favour a particular one. Shar's Dark Dancer avatar is the dancing, fluid, feminine figure with covered eyes and twirling robes that we see in the ruins of the Grymforge and its Gauntlet wing in particular. These depictions, wrought from stone, are beautiful, enthralling and intimidating. One of them in particular is also huge. Manipulation is paramount even in the aesthetic of these statues. To look upon the statues is to be awestruck by the goddess you're serving. They're also more than a bit male-gazy, but this is also how Shar decides to manifest herself when she meets Shadowheart in the Sharon Cloister in Baldur's Gate. She may simply prefer to appear as the Dark Dancer when she manifested herself in the minds of both Ketheric and Shadowheart. The Dark Dancer isn't an avatar chosen at random, because dancing itself is a core part of Shar worship. It's crucial in the Nightfall ritual in particular, where devotees dance together to honour the Dark Lady. Shar's Dark Dancer mirrors this practice. The avatar form is 7 foot tall and who, quote, dances gracefully and alluringly, her jet black body sparkling with scars and her eyes 2 hypnotic orbs that can emit both harmful and beneficial gaze effects. Descriptions as the Dark Dancer don't specify that her eyes are covered, but they are in the Second Era statues. Considering the Dark Dancer can cast spells from her eyes which harm or heal, according to Netheril, Empire of Magic, it makes sense that such a powerful aspect of her avatar should be covered. I do think there's an ulterior motive here too. Shar's headdress prevents her worshippers from looking her directly in the eye, preventing them from making that intimate connection that comes with eye contact. Shar always keeps herself at arm's length. Hence, if she does manifest herself to a follower, it has even more impact and makes them feel even more special because Shar is so difficult to directly connect with. Shar is manipulative, I'm telling you. You can't fault Ketheric for his attention to detail because Shar's traditional weapons are incorporated into her Dark Dancer statues. There are her dual-wielded, unholy wounding short swords and her Discs of the Night, functionally returning speed chakrams. The platform that takes Sharon's down to the Shadow Crossing is actually a Disc of Night, and this item that she's holding in her gargantuan statue form in the middle of the stronghold is also a Disc of Night. No coincidence that these chakrams look almost identical to Shar's holy symbol. So, this is what the Dark Dancer looks like. Yet, Shar isn't referred to as the Dark Dancer in the many, many texts you can find in the Gauntlet. Instead, she is by and large referred to by the name of Night Singer. The Night Singer is another one of Shar's favoured avatars. This one couldn't be further from the Dark Dancer. Instead of dancing robes, the Night Singer is an over 10-foot tall figure masked with thousands of feathers of all kinds, which trail away into an increasingly intangible cowled cloak of gigantic proportions which merges into any shadows and darkness present. From a practical point of view, this is harder to depict in statue form as it requires a higher amount of detail to render each feather one entirely different from the next. The Night Singer doesn't speak, she sings. Faiths and pantheons describe her song as hauntingly beautiful and tragic, heavy with loss and sorrow. Netheril, Empires of Magic, writes that her singing voice was said to make those who heard it stand lost in hopelessness or willingly do whatever she instructed. Whereas the Dark Dancer is physically enthralling, hypnotic, and arresting, the Night Singer is emotionally so. A slight tangent here. By calling Dame Aelin, Seluna's ASMR daughter who was imprisoned in the Shadowfell, the Night Song, Shar exhibits more of her dark cunning. The name blends with Shar's mythos perfectly. I mean, of course the Night Singer has power over the Night Song. The singer has power over the song they sing, do they not? And how they sing it. Aelin is the song Shar sings, an extension of her being. Some sort of twisted maternal energy is at work here. Aelin becomes a sacred Sharan entity instead of the sacred Selûnite entity that she really is, thus rendering her a double insult to Shar's sister, the Moon Maiden, making Aelin Shar's niece. The Dark Dancer statues gaze down at hundreds, possibly thousands of Sharans who filed past in pursuit of their duties. Life would have been similar to what Shadowheart was subject to in the cloister of the Sombre Embrace in Baldur's Gate. Rigorous training was undergone in ranged and melee warfare, espionage, seduction, lockpicking, trap disarmament, languages, interrogation, infiltration, and, of course, worship. The martial catechism that you can find in the cloister of the Sombre Embrace gives a good idea of what this was actually like to live through. Melee drills last for 2 hours each day, and bloodletting is acceptable. Indeed, it is expected. Remember, a well-trained warrior has the scars to prove it. Ranged drills are the same. The targets Sharans aim for, though, are different. Targets will progress from fixed to moving to live. I do not like to dwell on whether those moving live targets were animals or people, as I'm not quite sure which one is worse. Finally, poison classes for 2 hours a day. Crafting and theory of poisons and concoctions. Pupils shall be dosed with low levels of poisonous substances in order to develop their tolerance. I imagine that some worshippers felt off-kilter after their poisoning class, and that area of the fortress smelt like bile and disgust. All walks of life were present in the Grymforge and among these worshippers. A document titled The Ladies' Worshippers lists nicknames alongside multiple noble titles. The noble titles indicate to me that some noble families were trying to get ahead in life, society and prestige by siding with Ketheric in the hope that his victory would raise their families to unforeseen heights. By the time Tav reads this list of the Ladies' Worshippers, every single name has been crossed out and annotated with "no longer," the last act of a devout as Yurgir rampaged through the corridors. If you're looking for more lore about what happened with Yurgir and why he rampaged through the Gauntlet, then I urge you to go watch my Ruin of Wraithwind video, because I go into that in a lot more detail than I'm going to explore in this video. The Ruin of Wraithwind video talks about the story of the town of Wraithwind as a whole, and the Gauntlet is a huge part in that. Especially because the very fact that the Yurgir rampaged through the Gauntlet is because of a upset and disillusioned and rebellious stonemason. So go watch that if you want to hear more about Yurgir. Of those initiates, acolytes and clergy that were crossed off of the list of Our Lady's worshippers, those with naturally black hair were looked upon with reverence or envy. Sharans believe that those with raven black hair are sacred to Shar, marked by her favour. It's partially why Shadowheart was chosen to be abducted as a child, and I will talk about that more in an upcoming video about God's favourite princess. Some prized dark hair so much that they dyed their own hair black or enchanted it to appear blue-black. Day to day, Sharon slept on stone beds, cushioned with blankets that have long since rotted away, waking up to don onyx jewellery and the sacred colours of the Dark Dancer, black and purple. Even though they all had a shared interest and love for Shar, paranoia was still fostered within their ranks. When the Harpers began to infiltrate Ketheric's plans to churn out Dark Justiciars, Sharon turned on Sharon in an attempt to root out any spies. One note in Baldur's Gate 3 is written by an acolyte who misidentified a loyal Sharon as a spy and took their whip to them accordingly. This shouldn't be entirely unexpected though. Despite everyone in the Grymforge being Sharon, trust was slim among Shar's acolytes. Bar some prisoners, Harpers, Selûnites and civilians disturbing the homogeny of Shar worship, those studying within the Grymforge all had a shared goal. And yet, they still turned on each other. Sharon's dogma encourages backstabbing and being two-faced to those who are supposed to be kin. Her Law of Secrets tome explains that what is a secret but truth cast into darkness? Lurk in the shadows and listen for hushed words. The softer a thought spoken, the more power it contains, the more discord it sows, the more scars it may carve. The deceived turn to Shar. Do this once a 10-day, and the Lady of Lost shall know you. Even within the Grymforge, your secrets weren't safe. Just because you worshipped the same goddess and likely lived in the Grymforge for months, that didn't mean that the law of secrets should go unobserved. And so every 10-day, I assume some friendships were tested, some acolytes' secrets revealed to Dark Ones for exploitation. And so the faithful were brought deeper into their worship through this picked scab of bitterness which could never truly heal. Every 10-day, another ritual occurred. When night fell, Dark followers would celebrate with a nightfall feast, banqueting at long stone tables. Carved tablets found throughout the Grymforge order a Selûnite to be murdered in Shar's name at the crescendo of each nightfall, or a Lathandarian or a Mistran. These substitute sacrifices might sound unprompted and maybe random, so let me explain. Lathandarians make for a viable alternative because Lathander is the god of hope, creativity, and new beginnings. For a goddess who bluntly forbids her devout from feeling, expressing, or pursuing hope, Lathander is her polar opposite and thus her enemy. I explain more about Shar's vendetta against hope in my video about the first era of the Grymforge, which you can find on this channel. As for Mystra, Shar tried to take over Mystra's role as the goddess of magic by sending the god Cyric to murder Mystra. It didn't work. Mystra's previous incarnation, Mistral, is actually Shar and Selûne's daughter, born from both of their magical essences. Shar has had it out for Mystra for eternity, jealous of her daughter's reign over the weave. Don't try to sketch out that family tree because it is a stump. These carved tablets may say that a Selûnite, a Lathandarian, or a Mistran has to be sacrificed every nightfall, but Shadowheart does explain to Tav that in the real world, this wasn't always the case. She says that some enclaves sacrifice a goat instead and toast to Shar afterwards. Sacrificing a living being still counts as an act of wickedness, which Nightfall demands, so this is a loophole that helps Sharon cells abide by their law of secrecy, which, again, I explain in that first video about the first era of the Grymforge. Nightfall, however, used to be a far more regular occurrence. Its original incarnation was a nightly occurrence and didn't have the sacrificial element, because you'd run out of Selûnites or goats pretty quickly if that was the case. Feasting wasn't the main focus either. Dark followers performed an invocation and then danced together and listened to a sermon from a clergy member or a female worshipper with raven hair. Again, black hair is quite important to Sharons. Following this, they would drink, dance, and eat together. Between generations, broadly speaking, religious rituals do tend to get diluted, but Nightfall went in the other direction and got way more extreme. Honouring Shar can take a different form in the Kismut ceremony. Now, there's no record of these actually occurring in the Grymforge in either era, but it is described in Faiths and Avatars as the most important ceremony for Shar's Dark Ones. I theorise that Kismuts were conducted in the Grymforge, but any evidence of that has long since decayed. Kismut is the informal name for the ritual known as Kiss of the Lady. The Lady is, of course, Shar. An entire night is dedicated to slaying living beings and doing dark deeds in Shar's name. Closing out a Kismut comprises of a feast to be held at dawn, in opposition to the feasts of Nightfall. Kismuts are scheduled irregularly on the orders of the Temple of Old Night in Kalimport, which is where Shar's worshippers are able to be open about their affiliation. There would have had to have been correspondence between the Temple of the Old Night and the Grymforge, but again, no evidence of this remains. Kismuts do sound like they should contain some erotic element, but the name actually comes from one of Shar's most formidable weapons, the touch of her lips. Should Shar kiss another creature, at the moment that their lips touch, the subject is forced to choose between lifelong servitude to the Dark Lady or death. So those are the rituals that would have been undertaken in the Grymforge during the Second Era, but what about the actual artifacts that they had? One of the most precious artifacts in the Grymforge during the Second Era was a partial Mirror of Loss. Those of you who have made it to the end of Shadowheart's questline will recognise the name. The Mirror of Loss is the intimidating black disc that Shadowheart is bidden to gaze into by her Mother Superior. Each time she does, she undergoes memory loss, eradicating any recollection of her childhood as a Selûnite, her training under Shar's name, and basically having any kind of inner life, forgetting her favourite flower and that she loves animals, for example. The Mirror of Loss was used to turn her into a blank slate that knew only her love for Shar. The Mirror of Loss found within the Grymforge is shattered. It's always been shattered, even during the peak of the Grymforge's second era. Nevertheless, it's still a priceless artifact for Sharans. Having an intact one within the cloister of Sombre Embrace is a rare privilege indeed. Due to its rarity, scholars within the Grymforge studied it, striving to ascertain what it could be used for. It appears that Shar only tells her most trusted servants the true purpose of the Mirror of Loss, with Viconia being one of the few who knows its secret. Reflections of Loss records that the Grymforge Sharans claim to feel some echo of Shar's power and majesty when in the presence of the mirror, even though it is shattered. They are often said to feel lesser once they step away from the mirror. Little do the gazers know that the mirror is acting almost exactly as it's intended. It subtly robs those who gaze into it of their memories, leading to them feeling diminished in their retreat. Forgetting can go both ways. The book The Unclaimed writes about a penitent of Shar who forgot most of her life in service to Shar. Despite her dedication, when she passed into the Fugue Plane, Shar didn't come to claim her. Even Kelemvor couldn't intervene, and the Sharan was left in holy amnesia for thousands of years, not knowing why Shar didn't come to claim her, but with no memories of her life to hold on to, because all had been sacrificed in Shar's name. It's not spelled out in the text, but it does say that she placed her memory upon the altar of devotion, so I think this may be a warning against overuse of the Mirror of Loss. Although gazing into the mirror is a way to commune with Shar, doing it too much does come with risks. Maybe this devout gazed into the mirror for so long that she ridded Shar's memory of her presence as well. Or maybe Shar knows she's waiting in the Fugue Plane and just doesn't care. After all, she is an evil-aligned deity. We have reached the halfway point of me telling you about the Grymforge's second era, so just a quick reminder to like and subscribe, and if you want to support me even more, I also have a Patreon, where supporters can get early ad-free access to my lore videos and a bonus lore video each and every month. This month I'm doing a lore cleanup, where I talk about all the lore that I couldn't fit into my videos, and somehow, despite their length, I do manage to cut some bits out, so if that's something you're interested in, then I would love to have you over there too. The main purpose of rebuilding the Grymforge was the addition of the Gauntlet. For those who want to become Dark Justiciars, the Gauntlet is a streamlined series of tests, at the end of which is the final trial: kill Aelin, a Selûnite Aasimar imprisoned within the Shadowfell. Towards the end of the Grymforge's second era, this would become less of a trial succeeded only by the faithful, and more a conveyor belt for the means of churning out Dark Justiciars for Ketheric's army. Ketheric wanted legions of Dark Justiciars to bolster his forces against the joint Harper Druid alliance that were bringing the war to Wraithwyn. To prevent Ketheric Thorm from spreading the dark deeds he was committing in Shar's name to Faerûn, a battle for Wraithwyn broke out. I go into everything this comprised of in excruciating detail in my Ruin of Wraithwyn video, so if you want more detail on that series of events and the Thorm family, then I urge you to watch that. For this video, it's the amount of Dark Justiciars that Ketheric wanted that I need you to bear in mind. Despite the fact that Shar typically commands her followers to avoid widespread war and enslaving people, that seems to be exactly what Ketheric is pursuing. The reasoning behind that command is that Shar wants to gain followers and not see their lives thrown away for no certain gain. Because Sharans have to worship in secret in cells, it can be very easy to wipe out entire enclaves in different regions if they take the battle to anyone better equipped than them, which, considering they have to worship in the shadows, is quite likely. So encouraging her paladin, Ketheric Thorm, to wage all-out war seems to be counterintuitive. I'll return to that later. The Gauntlet, I assume, was devised by Ketheric, or it was devised by an unnamed and uncredited Sharon who's been lost to time. It didn't exist during the Grymforge's first era, so it is a relatively new initiative as far as I can tell. Shadowheart says that the Gauntlet is the highest test of the Dark Lady's faithful, to judge if they are worthy of becoming a Dark Justiciar. The old ways were lost over time. Now some claim the rank simply by killing a single Selûnite, but before they were a true elite. Many would attempt the trials, but few would succeed. Shadowheart is right. In the ages before the 15th century and the 14th, when the Gauntlet was built, Dark Justiciars were feared across the realms. Deep in Menzoberranzan, even Minthara has heard of their ruthlessness. According to Faiths and Avatars, instead of facing formalised trials, Sharons would be called to become a Dark Justiciar after killing a member of the Selûnite clergy. So, no ordinary lay Selûnite at all, someone who instead has been formally trained in worshipping Selûne and elevated to a person of authority in religious matters, i.e., someone who would be missed were they to suddenly disappear. By the time of the Gauntlet in the Grymforge, this definition has been loosened to be just a Selûnite, likely so that Aelin fits those requirements. What exactly happened in the times of yore after that point, when a Dark Justiciar killed a member of the Selûnite clergy, is shrouded in mystery. Faiths and Avatars goes as far as to describe becoming a Dark Justiciar as becoming part of a secret society. Whichever way one becomes a Dark Justiciar, the end result is almost always the same. You become one of Shar's elite warriors, blessed by her, and able to wield the Shadow Weave in Shar's name. I assume that normally this would be the final step in a long, exhaustive process. Killing a Selûnite and surviving the ordeal was rare enough to have those who made it through the experience anointed a Dark Justiciar, so it must have been quite the feat to achieve this. But Ketheric wanted a vast amount of Dark Justiciars, and quickly. And so they had to bypass this traditional route, and the Gauntlet was created. Experiences, which usually would have taken years to undergo, were concentrated and finessed into months of training. Almost like cramming for an exam, pretty much. With Aelin imprisoned below in the Shadowfell, the most difficult bit of the process, killing a Selûnite, was almost trivialised. As an immortal Selûnite Aasimar and daughter of Selûne, Aelin obviously counts as a Selûnite. That's not all though. Aelin is also imprisoned in the Shadowfell, Shar's own realm, in a tiny ritual circle. Then there are also the mage hands that are strong enough to hold her back. Whenever a prospective Dark Justiciar comes into the Shadowfell to slay her, there's no fair fight. Those mage hands hold Aelin still while she's killed, resurrected, and then killed all over again. There is absolutely no risk involved, unlike the old traditional way of becoming a Dark Justiciar. Spare a moment also to think a bit deeper of what this must have been like for Aelin. Imprisoned in the Shadow Plane, she is buffeted at all sides by lethal damage, and also the emotional effect of the Shadowfell on someone's psyche. The Manual of the Planes describes what kind of toll the Shadowfell can take on someone's mind. Immediately upon entering the Shadowfell, you feel a banked enthusiasm and waves of sadness. You'd feel increasing proportions of failure, hopelessness, depression, and melancholy, with each day a new trial of resolve. You would want to give up. Initiates don't spend long down there and must be desensitized to such feelings or associate them with their Dark Lady, but imagine how this must affect Aelin. Aelin has been trapped in the Shadowfell for a century. Though being an Aasimar child of Selûne would insulate her against these negative feelings somewhat, it doesn't inure her to them. Being able to challenge Shadowheart when she enters the Shadow Plane to end Aelin's life for good is a testament to Aelin's mental fortitude. Anyone else would be reduced to a wet, shivering Lemur-type creature of passive melancholy. Returning to the Gauntlet, the entire process did have to be codified. Should a Sharon attempt these activities in the wild, they would get caught, killed, or imprisoned. In the Grymforge, however, they're doing all of this to prove themselves to Shar in what is, effectively, a controlled environment. There's the soft step trial, which tests stealth, evasion, and lockpicking. The self-same trial has you destroy your mirror image. The Faith Leap trial has you memorize a route and then follow it from memory. There is no in-field espionage here, where you have to remain undercover and remain unnoticed by your neighbours. No careful planning about which member of the Selûnite clergy to target and how to cover your tracks and shift blame. With tutors, acolytes, training and guidance about the trials, failure isn't impossible, but it is unlikely. Essentially, it's an open book test. Yes, lockpicking and sneaking are important, but is it really the same if you learn how to do it in a classroom rather than in real life with rain and patrolling guards and dark alleyways? How legitimate of a Dark Justiciar are you really if the Selûnite that you're meant to eliminate is being held still by mage hands? If you don't have to dispose the body afterwards and really sit with what you've done, but instead see the Selûnite rise again, physically right as rain. That is the main question here. Does the streamlined Gauntlet lessen the veracity and legitimacy of the Dark Justiciars? I think so. Even though they were Dark Justiciars in name and would have still had Shar's blessing, I don't think they would have been the same calibre as the former soldiers which had passed into legend. Fighting Dark Justiciars would still have been grim for the druids and harpers who met them on the battlefield, though. From the darkness, Dark Justiciars would emerge, moving with the confidence of someone in a brightly lit area. Dueling with a Dark Justiciar was made even more intimidating because you ran the constant risk of being blinded. The Justiciar's scimitar blinded opponents if it struck with advantage. Practically, that means that if a Dark Justiciar was flanking an enemy, attacking while hidden, or attacking an enemy that was off balance, restrained, entangled, or prone, their opponent would be blinded. Which means that every subsequent attack would also hit with advantage. One wrong move against a Dark Justiciar and you're effectively doomed. All of that is kind of ironic considering those who have been blinded or were born blind are coveted as worshippers of Shar. To make matters worse, Dark Justiciars had a vested interest in fighting during the night or in the shadows, as the Dark Justiciar helmet makes clear. It grants the wearer an increased critical hit chance if the wearer is obscured by darkness. A significant proportion of the druid harper encounters with Ketheric Sharon hordes likely took place at night, not only because that is when Shar was the strongest, but because Dark Justiciar armour offered all kinds of incentives to fight when visibility was low. Ketheric's most famous change to the Grymforge was the addition of the Gauntlet. His most impressive feat, however, was harnessing a shadow crossing. I was curious about what this baptism wellspring actually was the first time I played Baldur's Gate 3. I knew that it took us to the Shadowfell / the Plane of Shadow, Shar's realm, but I wanted to know how. How did Ketheric create a portal to the Shadowfell in the Grymforge? After some digging, I found that the Manual of the Planes explains that places where the boundary between the world and the Shadowfell are thin are known as shadow crossings. Dark alleys, strange caves, even a gloomy basement could harbour a shadow crossing, as all are places of darkness, which is where, statistically, shadow crossings are most likely to occur. Shadow crossings are such a well-known phenomenon that they've even spawned their own genre of folk superstitions in Faerun. The Manual of the Planes explains too that common folk make signs against evil or whisper a quick prayer before continuing down dim streets, so strong is the fear that the Shadowfell evokes. Hence, this is a shadow crossing. It's not called this in Baldur's Gate 3, but as it transports people to the Shadowfell, you can bet that's what it is. Furthermore, the Underdark is a fitting place for it, as Shar is the goddess of the Underdark. Plus, the deeper you go, the more likely it is there are portals to the Shadowfell in the Underdark. Upon reading the Underdark sourcebook, I found that there's a Tyrellian theory that the Underdark becomes the Plane of Shadow if you go down deep enough. Delve deep enough either way, and portals to the Shadowfell do appear more frequently. A wary delver may spot rocks that seem to disappear into shadow, or light that doesn't quite fall right in a cavern, both of those things being a sign of a shadow crossing. The pool in the Grymforge may be a naturally occurring shadow crossing that's taking the form of an underground lake. The Dark Lake in the Underdark, which provides passage to the Grymforge, means there is a water table nearby, so this is plausible. Or Shar could have manifested the shadow crossing herself as a way to initiate Dark Justiciars at their final test, but as it's more convoluted, I do prefer the idea that this is a naturally occurring shadow crossing, but let me know what you think in the comments. When the Gauntlet was at its peak, churning out Dark Justiciars to fight on the battlefield and step over their dead comrades, Yurgir struck. I went over this in detail and its finer points in my Ruin of Wraithwind video, so I'm not going to re-explain Yurgir's rampage here. But briefly, Raphael made 2 deals. One with Morfred, the Wraithwind Mason who built Moonrise Towers, to eliminate all the Dark Justiciars, and the other with Leithindor, a Dark Justiciar. Leithindor wanted to escape Yurgir's massacre, so Raphael turned him into a mischief of rats. Yurgir in turn signed a contract with Raphael to destroy all Dark Justiciars in the Gauntlet. He had no idea that the last final Dark Justiciar was hiding among the rats. The Orthorn was trapped there for a century, singing his contract over and over to try and figure out why he couldn't leave. Faiths and Pantheons casts this entire annihilation in an entirely new light. Shar can sense when her portfolio is going to be invoked. She senses any act of treachery or nihilism that takes place under the cover of darkness, 10 days before it happens, and retains the sensation for 10 days after the event occurs. In other words, Shar almost definitely knew what was going to happen in the Gauntlet 6 months before those events occurred, and she didn't warn Ketheric. In the previous lore video I made about the Grymforge, centered on its first era and Seluviali, I spoke about Shar's true purpose. As a reminder, Shar desires above all else to return to the ancient calm of non-existence and emptiness at the start of time from which she was born. This is what Shar is working towards, total annihilation and the end of existence. Tragically, she craves that which is almost impossible to reclaim, the nothingness of pre-existence. So suddenly it might make sense why Shar doesn't care much about her small cells of worshippers, or why she orders her most devout, like Viconia and Shadowheart, to wipe out entire churches dedicated to her and start anew elsewhere. Shar wants to see the entire slate wiped clean, and then she'll finally have got what she wanted. In other words, Ketheric's Dark Justiciar horde was never really meant to succeed. Shar knew that he would fail, but the war leading to this failure weakened the link between the material plane and the shadow plane. The veil between the two planes becomes thin in any areas filled with death and loss. Battlefields are prime spots for shadow crossings to occur, or for the Shadowfell to leak into the material plane. This is where I believe the Shadow Curse came from. It wasn't a curse in the way I thought at first. It's not Ketheric saying a specific sequence of words that then split Wraithwind between the material plane and the shadow plane. Instead, at the crescendo of slaughter, when the veil was at its thinnest, Shar chose that moment to pounce. It must have been improved by Ketheric also dying at this exact moment, the one who so much effort and fear and terror had been focused on, for his life to extinguish at that precise moment, provided the perfect time for Shar to unleash her plane. She concentrated the area of the plane of shadow that aligned with Wraithwind with her power, flooding it with a shadow weave and splitting the land in two. Thus, the Shadow Curse lands were born. To be crystal clear, that theory about the source of the Shadow Curse is just my theory. It's not explained or confirmed in canon sources whatsoever. Yet, having read so many D&D sourcebooks, I think I'm right. Feel free to disagree or agree or add any extra theories you have in the comments, because I would love to know what you think. Like, genuinely, it makes my day to see your theories in the comments. One last thing I will be drawing your attention to here in the Gauntlet is the Gauntlet's panic room. Here you can find the remains of a Dark Justiciar who had hidden from the Merregans and Hellboars and Yurgir. This was the same room where the monk of the sentient amulet was tormented. He worshipped Lathander. It's ironic that a Dark Justiciar would flee to an interrogation room to seek safety from the Hells. A true Dark Justiciar would never. Those fanatic warriors from legend would have fought to the death to prevent their lady's fortress from being desecrated. I've spent time explaining what the Grymforge was like for initiates, Dark Justiciars, and Seluviali. One key aspect remains that I want to examine. What is it like to receive guidance directly from the Lady of Loss? One thing about Shar is that she is going to change her approach to best manipulate whomever's ear she's whispering into. So I have 2 case studies for you. Let's do Ketheric first. Ketheric appears to have been spoken to directly by Shar. Records of this are immortalised in the stone tablets found throughout the Grymforge, but bear in mind that Ketheric could have lied about this. If he's saying that Shar spoke directly to him and named him her paladin, who in their right mind would disagree? But let's take the stone tablets at face value. First, the fact that they're stone tablets and not parchment or paper is reminiscent of the Christian/Hebrew 10 Commandments or the tablets given to Musa in the Quran. To Ketheric that means nothing, but to us as players, seeing words engraved in stone immediately makes them appear religiously significant. Ketheric is, in effect, making himself part of Shar's religious doctrine. Talk about ego. I've shortened the engravings for brevity's sake, and this is the first part that I want to examine. So said Shar to me, Ketheric Thorm. It was Lord Ao who created chaos, it was from chaos that I formed, and it is I who anoint you my paladin. From this day forth, let my laws be known. Right here, Shar is drawing a line that leads directly from Lord Ao to her to Ketheric. In effect, it makes it sound like Ketheric's power is channeled directly from Lord Ao, like a divine grandfather. This isn't just flattering an ego, this is feeding a delusion. But it worked. Shar's honeyed words pulled Ketheric even further under her sway. What better reason to abandon Selûne than to become the divine champion of her sister? Then there's the law of obeyance. The word of Ketheric Thorm is the word of Shar. You shall put no god nor mortal before him. You shall question him in neither word nor deed. Bow your head in prayer. Proclaim your devotion to Shar and her paladin, Ketheric Thorm. When your prayer is finished, speak thus. Mistress Shar, I have glorified your name. Master Thorm, I have cried out your word. I am your servant forevermore. Twice over this flatters Ketheric. At Shar's command, he's included in a prayer dark followers must utter, making him feel like a god himself. He's even aligned alongside Shar as master and she mistress. Where Shar will use a comforting, kind tone towards Shadowheart, she gasses Ketheric up. Feeding his ego paradoxically kept him servile and made him feel like he's where he's meant to be. It's divine destiny, the way that Shar paints it. Now we come to Shadowheart. Shar undergoes an insidious approach when it comes to manipulating Shadowheart. She is comforting, gentle, and ever so slightly romantic. Lines include, "This is why I come to you alone, Shadowheart. Only you can help me." And, "I wish you no harm. I wish only to offer my embrace. I am with you always, in your thoughts, your deeds, in your dreams." And finally, "This is my sacred proving ground. This is where you shall show me just how much you love me." Shadowheart has not been allowed this level of intimacy with anyone else. Nocturne manages to make Shadowheart remember snatches of their friendship after undergoing the Mirror of Loss, but that's about it. Her mother superior is cruel, the other initiates jealous of the special attention Shadowheart gets, and of course there's no family to write home to. Shar whispering in Shadowheart's ear is the only intimacy that Shadowheart is allowed. She speaks of Shadowheart's love for her, how Shadowheart is special, how Shar wants to embrace her and is always with Shadowheart even when she sleeps. It's really akin to grooming. Shar also dangles Shadowheart's lost memories before her to twist that knife of manipulation. Should Shadowheart pass the gauntlet, Shar murmurs, "Then I can embrace you, elevate you, and reveal to you your true purpose." The Lady of Loss is teasing Shadowheart with the answers she seeks. Shar offers to tell Shadowheart of her true purpose. Why her memories were taken, why she's been singled out from the others. Shadowheart naturally desires to know why she's been subject to all of this, as Aylin herself knows. Shadowheart may try not to hope for answers, but curiosity still haunts her. Just before you descend into the Shadowfell to encounter Aylin, if Shadowheart is in your party, she requests a brief moment to pray to her goddess. Normally, you can let her pray, there's a moment of silence, and then you continue on. Drink down a potion of detect thoughts, and you can hear what Shar is murmuring to Shadowheart. Playing Origin Shadowheart, Shar says the following before Shadowheart descends into the Shadowfell. "You deserve this, Shadowheart, above all others. I wish all my followers had your spirit. Now onwards. Warm my blade with the Selûnite's blood." You would think that if you were Tav and you used Detect Thoughts, you'd hear the same phrase, but you don't. If Tav reads Shadowheart's thoughts and eavesdrops on Shar's honeyed words, her final line is different. Shar says, "Now go. Warm my blade with moon-crazed blood." I've been thinking about this for a while. Shar is a god, so it is entirely within her ability to have two different conversations at the same time and change the words depending on who is listening in. Instead of the words being literally different, their interpretation may be different depending on who is listening. This, again, is my own theory, but I think Shar may be communicating her intent in a divine, ineffable way to Shadowheart. So when we listen to her in Shadowheart's thoughts, this intent is being run through Tav's consciousness, and the words coming out are being interpreted from the point of view of a non-Sharon. Hence the replacement of the words Selûnite blood with moon-crazed blood. As Tav can't be a Shar-aligned cleric, we'll never know if that would actually change anything. To Shadowheart, this intent is channeled through her Shar-infused mind, and the words that come out sound calm, comforting, and reasonable, whereas Tav hears the hunger in Shar's intent and her hatred for her sister's daughter. Should Shadowheart rebel and refuse to kill Aylin, Shar turns cruel and vindictive. In the game, as we play it, Shadowheart dyes or bleaches her hair silver at the beginning of Act 3 should she turn to Selûne, even though she doesn't want to admit it, a sign of her new direction and rejection of Shar. Shar favours those with dark hair, remember. Originally, this silver hair occurred differently. Shadowheart tries to leave the Shadowfell with Tav and the rest of the party after freeing Aylin. When she comes out the other side, her hair is silver and Shadowheart is battered and bruised. It may look like she left the Shadowfell at the same time as Tav, but really, Shar has had her trapped in the Shadowfell for an undisclosed amount of time, torturing and tormenting her for rejecting her orders. It may look like she left the Shadowfell at the same time as Tav, but really, Shar has had her trapped in the Shadowfell for an undisclosed amount of time, torturing and tormenting her for rejecting her orders. Shadowheart's hair turned white from the ordeal, so, when she was spat out, her hair had lost its raven sheen. Behind the curtain of that comforting voice is a cold, black disc. Shar is always ready to turn on her most devout. Her true nature is reflected somewhat when she manifests to Shadowheart in the House of Grief. Shar appears to be made of glistening stone, not soft, but impenetrable and immovable. I am done telling you about the second era of the Grymforge, and with that, I am done talking about the Grymforge, but I am going to be talking about Shar more in the future because you bet a Shadowheart video is coming. Shadowheart is actually one of the companions that I'm most familiar with because she's been in both my good and bad playthroughs as well as a bunch of my other ones, and we both have silver hair, so I immediately feel akin to her. If you made it this far through the video, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I would love to get to 10k before the end of the year, which feels reasonable, but also I'm going to touch wood because I don't want to jinx that. And I also do have a Patreon, so if you'd like to go and support me over there, I would massively appreciate it. And now, I am going to go and order pizza for my girlfriend and I, because frankly, it's been a hot as hell heatwave week. The heatwave is over now, thank God, and we deserve it. So I will see you folks next time.